Does your organization have a strategy in place for compliance, and specifically the retention and, just as importantly, the deletion of data? In this video, we're going to find out by looking at Microsoft Purview Data Lifecycle Management with retention policies and retention labels. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This is coming right up. So as we continue to look at implementing Microsoft Purview Information Protection and Data Lifecycle Management, we are going to focus on bullet point number 2 here in the MS 102 exam study guide today, which is implement retention labels, retention label policies, and retention policies. What are these all about? We're going to find out right now. So let's dive straight into it and switch over to the Microsoft Purview Compliance Center portal at compliance.microsoft.com. Once again, where do we need to be for this? We need to scroll down on our left-hand menu panel, and we're looking for Data Lifecycle Management, previously known in this Compliance Center as Information Governance. Now we have 2 items in here. We have Microsoft 365, which is what we are going to be looking at, but we also have Exchange Legacy in here as well, which remains in here because you can still use this area to configure archiving of email policies to a default of 2 years. But we're going to focus on Microsoft 365 here because this is where the bulk of data lifecycle management takes place now, with retention policies and retention labels. So what is this all about? Why do we need data lifecycle management? Well, this is an absolutely crucial piece of technology, not just in Microsoft terms, but all organizations need to be thinking about the documents and information that they are storing, whether physical or digital, but certainly within a Microsoft 365 environment. Anything that you are storing needs to be evaluated and assessed and marked for retention and deletion as appropriate. For regulatory purposes and or internal policies, information must be retained for certain amounts of time, and this can be based on industry standards such as GDPR or ISO 27001. All sorts of standards come into place, so you have to retain information for a certain amount of time. Equally, it's important that information is appropriately disposed of after a period of time as well. So it's just as important to delete the information when it is no longer needed. If you don't do that, if you retain information in your Microsoft 365 environment when it's no longer needed, and it's there when you are asked to participate in an e-discovery search, a legal search, put content on legal hold, or a subject access request, then you're going to have to provide that, and it should have been deleted. So definitely one that your compliance teams in organizations need to be mindful of. This is very, very important indeed. Now, in terms of the terminology that we're going to be talking about here, we have got retention policies first and foremost, and this is where it all begins. Retention policies are applied broadly at the service level, if you like. So they will apply to services like Exchange, email, to SharePoint sites, and so on and so forth. And retention policies are applied centrally. They cannot be applied or unapplied at a user level. Labels, on the other hand, are different. Labels are applied via label policies at the item level, so they can be applied to the email, to the file, and these can be applied by the user. They will see a list of retention labels available to them in their SharePoint document libraries and so on and etc. We also have in our data lifecycle management area here something called adaptive scopes. And this is something you can configure to apply retention in a more dynamic way rather than statically through very, very set conditions. And we will take a look at that in a moment. And we also have in here a couple of other settings that we'll briefly touch upon, which are policy lookup and import. And you can import other data into Microsoft 365, such as legacy PST files from on-premises mail systems, or PST files that may be in network repositories or drives somewhere. So lots of great content in here, very important for all organizations and a fair bit to learn. So let's start with retention policies. Let's take a look right in here. And what have we got? And we've got some information here which tells us what this is all about, and that users are going to create a lot of content every day, from emails to Teams and Yammer conversations, or more accurately now, Viva Engage, as Yammer is now known. And you use retention policies to keep the content you want and get rid of what you don't need. What an awful sentence. I don't like the grammar in that at all, but I suppose it says what it needs to say. Okay, so there are no existing retention policies in this demo tenant that I'm using at the moment. So we can go ahead and we can create our first retention policy in here by clicking on New Retention Policy. You guessed it. So we will have to enter a unique name in here, which we will put in, well, inventively I will call it a default retention policy. We can put a description in if we want to, but that's not a mandatory field on this occasion. I would advise you to always clearly label all of your retention policies. For the purposes of demo, I'm going to be lazy though. Okay, next, we have two choices in setting up our retention policy here, the type that we want to create. And a policy can be adaptive or it can be static. The advantage of an adaptive policy will automatically update where it's applied based on the attributes or properties that you define, like a user department field in Azure AD, for example, whereas a static policy is applied to content in a fixed set of locations and must be manually changed or updated if those locations change. We'll have a look at adaptive scopes as we go through in a moment, and we'll come back to that and show you what that experience looks like. But first we will set up a static policy where we are going to choose the locations containing the content that we want to retain. So static it is, and let's click on next. Okay, so there's a lot of choices in here that we can select, and there are some considerations that we have to be aware of. Let's go through what we've got. We can apply retention policies to exchange mailboxes and items in user, shared and resource mailboxes, emails, calendar items with an end date, notes, tasks, etc., and public folders. Does not apply to items in Microsoft 365 group mailboxes. We have SharePoint, Classic, and Communication sites. We've got OneDrive accounts. We've got Microsoft 365 group mailboxes and sites. As we just saw a moment ago, it's excluded from the Exchange mailboxes, but it's included here. Then we have Skype for Business conversations, which is interesting, why that would still be there. I can't really think why, to be honest, unless it relates to Skype for Business on premises, but why would that be here in the cloud? I'm not sure. Maybe somebody can tell me, because I sure don't know. Exchange public folders, yuck. That's my personal opinion coming out again, but Exchange public folders, I really don't see many people using this technology anymore. This was something that was very popular in the on-premises Exchange days, but has really been superseded by a lot of the functionality that is now available with shared mailboxes and other things like Teams. And there are some organizations who still use them and still migrate them over to Exchange Online. So that is why they are there and why they can be selected, but not commonly used anymore. We have Teams channel messages. So this is messages from channel conversations and channel meetings. This does not apply to Teams private channel messages, which are included 2 down from here separately. And we have Teams chats messages, one-to-one, individual chats, group chats, and meeting chats as well are included there. And then finally, the last 2 that we have in the list are Yammer community messages and Yammer user messages. Still called Yammer here, not Viva Engage yet. I suppose give that time to change, because that's been a very recent product name change. If you're watching this video later than May 2023 and you're thinking what the heck is Yammer all about here, then this video has not aged very well, because this should now be called Viva Engage. But I digress. So you can choose the locations that you want to apply your retention policy to, and depending on your needs, you might want to separate these out into different services per policy. Now, a good example where you are going to be forced to do so relates to Teams, and take a look and see what happens if I select one of the first 2 Teams selections here. We'll go for Teams channel messages, and the top ones slide off, because Teams retention policy types cannot exist alongside other Microsoft 365 workloads. They have to be in their own policy, or at least that's partly true. We can have Teams channel messages and Teams chats in the same retention policy. However, if we want a policy for Teams private channel messages, there you go. Those selections are automatically toggled to off as well. So you're going to need a separate policy for Teams channel messages and Teams chats, and another separate one for Teams private channel messages as well. So there we go. So as for this example, let's just go with one that selects Exchange mailboxes and SharePoint communication sites and OneDrive accounts. And you can see that when you select some of these locations to apply the policy, you have the option to include or exclude at the mailbox level or the site level or the account level. So you have a lot of granular controls that you can apply when it comes to creating your retention policies. So think carefully about how you want to deploy these. Alrighty, let's click Next. Now, here we need to decide if we want to retain content, delete content, or both. The default setting here when we first go in are to retain items for a specific period, and a common amount of time to retain items is 7 years. That's one of the more common periods of time that relates to certain regulatory standards for compliance. But we can drop down here and we have some other suggestions there. We have 5, 7, 10, or we can put a custom value in there as well. And this is all going to depend on the regulatory standards that your organization has to comply with, and or your own organizational internal policies. Okay, when do we want to start the retention period based on? Is it by when items were created or when items were last modified? So this is another one that you have to be careful about when you select this, and there are also some additional considerations around if you have migrated content into Microsoft 365 and it has not retained its actual creation date from on-premises. There are ways and means around that, and I'm going to point you in the direction of the wonderful Joanne Klein, who is a fellow Microsoft MVP, who has a great article on exactly that issue, on how to use retention in such a way that you can recover the original date that it had on premises. So I'll put some links to some of Joanne's great content in the description of this video. So think about if you want to retain based on date creation or last modification. In this instance, let's go for when the items were created. What do we want to do at the end of the retention period? Do we want to delete the items automatically, or do we want to do nothing? So there are a couple of choices we have to make there, and we can decide how we want to progress. Doing nothing is an option. It's potentially a dangerous option because you do need to delete items when they should be deleted, so be very careful about selecting that one. There is such a thing as a disposition review as well, which is something we can trigger in relation to retention, and we'll get to that in a short while. But we'll select delete items automatically in this instance. So these are the selections that we've got in relation to retain items for a specific period. We have some other choices here. We can choose to retain items forever, which means that they will be retained even if users delete them. And that's an important part of how retention works, actually, understanding the fact that if a retention policy or label is applied to content in Microsoft 365, a user can potentially think that they are deleting that content, and to them it may appear so, but there will be a copy of that content retained that is there for the purposes of retention and will remain so for the duration of that retention period. Retaining items forever is another dangerous one that many organizations who don't understand retention will fall into the trap of saying, well, if I do this, I'm going to be fine. I can always get back to the content that I may need to refer to, and it's never going to be accidentally lost. Big mistake, because it's just as important, as I've already said, to delete items when they're no longer needed as it is to retain them. So this is one to be used very, very carefully indeed. The final option we have here is to only delete items when they reach a certain age. So this is sort of the reverse of that top one. So they won't be retained, but when they reach the age that you choose, they'll be deleted from where they're stored. And again, we can do this based on a certain amount of time and based on when the items were created or when they were last modified. So let's go back to our first selection to retain items for a specific period. And let's go next. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've got. We've got a review screen here. It's taking us through the settings we've selected. We've got our policy name, we've got our description, we've got the locations where we want to apply, we've got our retention settings. And we've got a little warning here telling us that items that are currently older than 7 years will be deleted after you turn on this policy. This is especially important to note for locations scoped to all sources, for example, all Teams chats, because all matching items in those locations across your organization will be permanently deleted. So you need to think very, very carefully about applying these, and a suggestion would be test this diligently before you deploy retention broadly across your organization. So select subgroups, not like I've done here. Go in and drill down into those subgroups of users and services. But there we go. We can submit that and create that retention policy in our Microsoft 365 tenant right now. Okay, so we've successfully created our retention policy, and it's telling us to allow up to a week for the retention policy to be enforced. It's giving us some related tasks that we can complete now. We can create another retention policy if we want to, and take us right there from here. We can create a adaptive scope right from here if we want to, using attributes or properties like an email address, a site URL to define users, groups, or sites. Or we can create a retention label. So we'll not do that just now. We'll click on done, and we've got our default retention policy in here, which is absolutely awesome. One down. Now, as I said, users won't see this. This works in the background at that service level. So it's going to retain content on those Exchange mailboxes, the SharePoint sites, the OneDrives. Labels, on the other hand, will do this at the item level. But before we get to labels, let's briefly take a look at adaptive scopes. So if we go into adaptive scopes, we can see that it's taking a long time to load. Adaptive scopes can now be applied to multiple compliance solutions. As a result, you now manage adaptive scopes from roles and scopes. Well, who knew that? I certainly didn't. And we're getting a link to a new page here. So let's go to the new page and see what we can find. So roles and scopes is, let me just scroll up, expand the menu. It's right here under roles and scopes and adaptive scopes. That to me is completely illogical, but never mind. And I've already created one previously, an adaptive scope for a marketing department, but let's show you how this works. You create a scope, put in the scope name. So let's put in sales depth, put in a good description and click next. You can select an admin unit if you wish to. An admin unit is a set of users who are restricted by role permissions to particular parts of an organization. These are useful things to set up, admin units, if you have a global organization over multi-geographic locations. So you can set these by an admin unit to manage, and you could select from in here and search for a particular admin unit. I don't have any set up, so we'll not do that. What do we want to do this by? What type of scope do we want to create? Do we want to do it by users, where we'll select Azure AD attributes to define the users? Do we want to do it by SharePoint sites properties, such as URL and other refinable strings? Or Microsoft 365 groups, where we will select Azure AD attributes to define groups, such as name, description, and email address. I'll select users as an example, explore all of these, and you'll get a feeling for how they work. And we can add attributes here. So user attributes, we can have attribute is equal to, so we'll select, for example, the display name, the job title, the department. Department's a good one that I like to do as an example. And we could do department is equal to sales in this case. And you can add other query attributes here as well, and it tells you what that's going to be. So really cool stuff. So there we go. That's how simple it is to create an adaptive scope. And we are done. So now back in Data Lifecycle Management, let me just show you what that looks like. If we go into retention policies again and create a new retention policy, let's just call this one adaptive and go next. And let's choose adaptive this time, and we shall see what options we have. And now we can add the scopes to our policy scopes and locations. So here we go, click on Add Scopes, and we can choose whichever one we want to select. We have the sales department one that I just created, the marketing department one that I selected earlier. So let's choose the one that I just created and add that. And now retention is going to be applied at the locations that I select here based on that attribute that I put into the adaptive scope. So you can see the power of this, the benefit of this, and that this is not something that we will have to go in and amend. Whenever we have an Azure AD user who is set up, when joining an organization, if that department field is correctly filled in, and this illustrates one of the great benefits of properly populating all of your Azure AD fields with addresses and departments and job roles, because these are things that can be used in tools like this, then we've got some great things. We've got some great things that we can achieve with these tools. So we can go ahead and we can apply that adaptive scope to this retention policy, and it does the same thing essentially. So I'll not finish that off, because from this point on it's going to use that adaptive scope and it's the same principle, so we'll cancel that off and move on to the next topic. So now let's talk about labels. So labels are slightly different, and you can see I've been playing around there, and I've very lazily called one with a very illegible name there. But labels, as I mentioned earlier briefly, will apply to the item level, such as an email, such as a file, and they're often used as exceptions to retention policies. So these are great things to have in your organization. So similar process, you can create a label, give the label a name. So we'll just call this label A, 5 years. We can put in a description for the users. We can put in a description for the admins as well, which again, I would always encourage, but it's not mandatory, so I'm not going to do it here. We have similar options here to retain items forever or for a specific period, or we can enforce actions after a specific period, or we can just label the items. And if you change these, then you're going to get different options when you go to next. So for example, if we go just label items, if we go next, we've got no action is required for retention period on this label. So if we go back, let's see what we have if we enforce actions after a specific period. Then we can define how long the period is and when it begins. And we can do this in the same sort of criteria as we've seen so far, over a period of time, or when it was created, when it was modified, or in this case, when the items were labeled. So we have some slightly different options there. Or we can retain items forever or for a specific period, and similar options here on that. And we can also create a new event type here as well, and we can do event-based retention, so which is a whole nother thing altogether. But you can click on and name your event and give it a name and a description, and that's something we'll come back to and have another look at. But so next, what do we want to do in this process? And we've got some more options here for labels than we do for retention policies. We can delete items automatically at the end of the retention period. We can start a disposition review, which is a process that at the end of the retention period, an item will be marked for review, and you can assign reviewers who can then go in and decide if items can be safely deleted or whether other actions, such as changing the retention period, should be taken. You can change the label at this point. You can choose a replacement label. You can run a Power Automate flow to meet a specific business need, such as moving labeled items to a certain location or sending email notifications. Or you can deactivate retention settings, in which labeled items won't be retained or deleted when their retention settings are deactivated, and you'll have to manually remove any items that you want deleted. So you've got a lot of options here. The disposition review being a very, very good one, which is a nice sort of belt and braces option, or belt and suspenders option, I guess, if you're in the US. Braces probably means something different. And lots of options there. So really cool stuff. So, and if you do a disposition review, there are some stages that you can create and go through. So you can add stages, you can decide who the reviewers are, you can decide what happens between 1 to 5 stages, which are sequential and are completed by reviewers in the order they appear. So we can give our stage a name, stage 1, inventively. Reviewers for this stage, so you can add in the reviewers for this stage. Let's pick on Rachel, who she is. We can add another stage, and so on and so on, as you see. So we've got our disposition review. and then that's reflected there in the label settings. So we can click next onto there, we can review and finish, and we are in great shape. We've got our label, and as it creates it, it's probably, I'm going to guess, direct us to publish this label to Microsoft 365 locations. So we've got some options here. We can publish it. We can auto-apply this label to a specific type of content, or we can do nothing and choose to auto-apply it to content later. So let's read out these options briefly. So publish to Microsoft 365 locations, in which you will create a label policy to make this label available in locations such as Exchange and OneDrive. So when published, the users can manually apply it to their content or set it as the default label for content containers such as SharePoint document libraries or email folders. So if you're in SharePoint Online, you'll be able to see that in the properties of the item. You can click on the properties and you'll see in the drop down apply this label, and you can do so. Or you can auto apply to a specific type of content. So this is really cool as well. So let's select that one as an example. And if we do so, it's going to create an auto labeling policy straight away. So we'll just call this auto label. And here we go. And we've got some options to choose from here. We can apply label to content that contains sensitive info. And in the last video, I told you that sensitive information types were going to become relevant as we came into more of the features within Microsoft Purview. So we can do that as an option. And if we go next, we can choose the sensitive information types that we have. If we go into custom policy, we can create one. We can go into some of the enhanced ones, financial, medical, and health. We can search by country or region. So we can select those sensitive info types. We can also apply a label to content that contains specific words, phrases, or properties. So if we select that one, we can enter the conditions here that we want to match. So very, very cool stuff. We can also apply label to content that matches a trainable classifier. And we looked at trainable classifiers in the previous video as well, where we can select some of these built-in trainable classifiers, such as targeted harassment, profanity, discrimination. We can add these in and base our auto-labeling policy on those. And finally, apply a label to cloud attachments shared in Exchange, Teams, and Viva Engage. They're actually calling Yammer the right thing here. This is a preview feature, so do watch out for that. And here we can see more detail on what's going to happen there. So cloud attachments are files stored in SharePoint, OneDrive, or Office 365 groups that are attached to Outlook, Teams messages, and Viva Engage messages by sharing a link to the file instead of attaching a copy directly to the message. So the label will be applied only to the version of the file that is being shared and does not apply to the email or Teams or Viva Engage message. And as a result, you won't be able to choose Exchange as a location in the next step. So some important information there, and lots of information in terms of choices that you can make here. So really cool stuff. So here we go. Let's just pick on a random sensitive information type in this example. And we can see this financial one for Australia. Financial data is going to include SWIFT codes, tax file numbers, bank account numbers, credit card numbers. So in this situation, the retention label will be applied to content that matches the content within this sensitive information type. For the next stage, we can make some modifications if we want to. We can change the confidence levels and the instance counts and create groups and conditions if we need to. And then we can proceed on to the type of retention policy to create. And again, we can choose between adaptive and we can choose between static in terms of the locations that we want to select. For this one, for example, let's go in and add a scope, and we'll choose the marketing department for the scope for this one. And here we go. And based on the scopes that you added, the policy can be applied in these locations. So it's intelligent enough to know where this can be applied to, where it's going to work, where it's relevant. We've got OneDrive accounts, and we can go for next. Okay, choose a label to auto apply. So if we had more labels in here, we could make those choices, but we've got just the one label in here. We can replace that label if we wanted to, but I'm happy with that. Let's go for next. And here we decide whether to test or run your policy. And you can test this policy before turning it on to see if the label will be applied to the right content. And I always do this. I cannot encourage this enough. So definitely test the policy before running it. And with this, you'll be shown examples of content that fit your policy's conditions. No labels will be applied to content in your organization until you turn the policy on fully. So once you've been through that test phase, you can go and fully turn that on and go through the process again and edit that to turn it on fully, which is awesome. So there we go. Auto labeling policy has been created. Related tasks, we can go ahead and create another auto labeling policy. We can create a retention label. We can also create a sensitivity label as well, which is something we'll get to in the next video. So let's just click on done. And in here, we can see we've got our label and the details of it, when it was created, the retention duration, all really cool. Amazing. Now we should see in here some label policies now. There we go. Our auto label policy that we created there has been created in the label policies section. And we can see it's in simulation, which means it's in test. We can see the type is auto apply, who created it, and when it was last modified, and the date. So we can go into this and we can see the details, and we can view the simulation. So we can view it in progress and see what is going on with the simulation overview, and we can see samples that are ready for review if and when they come up, if there's a match. So keep checking back on that, and really cool stuff indeed. From here you can obviously publish your own labels right from here as well. You can choose the labels you want to publish in a more manual way, which was one of the options that we had previously. So we could publish this random one that I created earlier. We could go next. We can choose adaptive or static, choose the locations where we want to publish. So that's all locations, which includes content and Exchange email, Office 365 groups, OneDrive and SharePoint documents, or you can choose specifically the locations you wanted to apply to, name your policy, go through and click finish. And that is really cool stuff indeed. So beautiful, absolutely fantastic stuff. Retention is one of my favorite topics in Microsoft Purview. You can also from here do a policy lookup, so you can search for a specific user or SharePoint site or M365 group to find out which data lifecycle management policies, retention, label and auto labeling, that they're included in. So you can search by user or site or Microsoft 365 groups. So let's just do a search for me. Let's just add in Peter and do a search. And nothing happens. I've clearly not done that correctly. So Peter Rising, let's try that again. And there we go. So I am included in the default retention policy. And if I click on that, it's going to give me some more details on that policy. So that's cool as well. You can do that policy lookup. And then the final thing we have in Data Lifecycle Management is this import section. Now this is really useful to import email PST files from your organization's servers into Office 365. And there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can do it yourself, or you can ship hard drives to Microsoft to do that for you. So you have to set up a connector and go through that process. So that's not really in scope for this video, because this is about MS 102 and the exam study guide, but I shall include some information on this process for you in the description. And we may cover this in a future video because it's a very interesting topic. Not something I've done for a very long time, actually, so it'll be good to revisit it and see if anything has changed. But there you go. That is our video on data lifecycle management. You may be wondering how records management relates to all this. Records management is something that is very similar to data lifecycle management, and you will find that in the Microsoft Purview Admin Center as well. Not relevant at this point in this video series, but you can expect me to do a video on records management as well. But take a look at records management and understand the differences between data lifecycle management and records management, because there is a lot of overlap, but there you go. Fantastic. We shall call it a day on this video and start winding things up. Before we do though, one last thing. I forgot the most important part. It's the end user experience. The users kind of matter in all this, don't they? As administrators, it's so easy to lose focus on that sometimes. But what is the user experience like for retention labels and retention policies? Now, policies, they're not going to see at all. They are going to be applied at the container, the service level, behind the scenes. So they don't have to worry about policies. But if they want to apply retention labels manually, then they can do that from, in this example, SharePoint. We are in a document library, a policies document library here with an inventively named test document, as is ever the case with me. So how do we do it? We've got a document here. We can click on that document and we can click onto the information tab there, and we can scroll down and let's see what we've got now. In this section here, we've got sensitivity. So we can apply a sensitivity label to that content if we want to. We'll hold off on that because that's coming in the next video. We're going to talk all about sensitivity labels. But below that, we can apply a label, a retention label specifically. So we have three choices here. Just to note, this is from another tenant. So these are not ones that I created in the previous steps in this video, because you'll recall I created an auto label policy and I didn't do one manually, and it can take a great deal of time for these to be visible for them to apply in the document library. So I've switched to another tenant to show this very quickly to you, what the user experience actually looks like. So we can apply the labels here, personal financial PII for 3 years, and it gives a little bit of a description highlight there when you hover over it. Retain for 7 years, retention label. So we can select those, and it's as simple as that. So now we can end the video. And that's another video in the books, everybody. Thank you so much for watching along on this very, very important topic of retention within Microsoft Purview in Microsoft 365. Please let me know in the comments what you thought of the video. Please remember to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. And if you want to reach out to me on social media, you can find me particularly active on Twitter at M365Rising. Let's wind this up, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you on the next video very, very soon, where we will talk all about sensitivity labeling, another of my very favorite topics within Microsoft Purview. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.